Thanks for coming out. My name is Aaron Zook. I'm an Episcopal priest here in Chippewa Falls with two small parishes. I'm also the Canon to the Ordinary for the Diocese of Eau Claire, which is the Episcopal administration for about 45% of the geography of Wisconsin. And most recently, my work has included working as a fellow in the Faith and Justice Network for the New Begin House of Studies. I'm really happy to be here moderating this panel discussion. My wife's a public librarian, and we're huge book lovers and huge idea lovers in our house, so this is a real joy and a treat for me to be asked to do this. Tonight we've got 3 panel speakers. Each is going to give you in turn about 10 to 15 minutes of a little bit of conversation speech about their own particular connection to this topic. And then we're going to open up the floor to questions and answers. So I'll just sort of start geographically here with Andrew Patrie from North High School. Go ahead.
Hello everyone, I'm Andrew Patrie, teach English at North High School since 1998. Before I left tonight, my daughter, who also was trans, said, yeah, you go get him. White, straight, cis savior. I said, should I put my rainbow cape on? Out the door? She's like, no, don't do that. But I mean, I wanted to share that just because I obviously understand that talking about this topic, you know, I'm aware of my sort of outsider status, and that there are probably other people who, you know, could speak on the topic maybe with more credibility, but you get me as one of 3. But I can at least, you know, share sort of my connection to this topic. Obviously, as a parent, and I have a daughter in the Eau Claire School District who's just finished her freshman year at Memorial High School. In most of the writing, I say that I do just in my personal life since 2016 has been about this topic, which is around the time that you know, our daughter had come out to us, and then we began the process of changing name, puberty blockers, and hormone treatments and such. So, as a teacher at North, I'm the advisor for our GSA, and pre-COVID, it was probably a more tightly oiled machine than it has been. This is our first year kind of finding our way back. And then in the midst of this, there was all kinds of stuff that happened this spring in particular. I know Chippewa experienced that as well, with challenges to books and sort of outlandish conspiracies about litter boxes and the admin office, and yeah, it was you know, just as masks were kind of coming off, and then this is the next thing that we had to deal with. And I think there was a heightened sense of, you know, concern from the GSA students, especially when we approached Day of Silence in April. But we had administrative support, which was great, and you know, the day went off without a hitch. I was thinking, like, there have been years in the past where, you know, we've had students try to, you know, plaster straight pride posters up during that particular day, or, you know, just sort of phone calls from parents concerned about, you know, is this a school-wide thing? Like, no, you know, we have about 2,000 kids in the building. There's maybe 100 who participate in this. So there's that connection to it, and then I think as an English teacher, there has been attempts through the district to kind of look at curriculums that are out there that they can kind of, you know, bring in to supplement. And I have noticed a much more diverse range of voices coming through the products. But, you know, interestingly, but probably not unsurprisingly, sexual identity is not something that's dealt with overtly in the texts that students are reading. Maybe covertly, like if you're looking at an author bio or something like that, you might, you know, there might be some information about sexuality. But yeah, so there hasn't really been, you know, a way for students to kind of engage with those topics aside from what maybe teachers might find and bring in. And I guess one of the privileges of being an AP Lang teacher is that I can go out and look for other texts because it's all sort of under the aegis of rhetoric and argumentation. So we can take a piece and look at an argument and talk about how the writer's constructing it. But we can also deal with whatever the subject matter might be within the piece. And the other part that I think has been nice, again, speaking as an English teacher, is when we're told to write with students, write along with the students. And so if it's personal writing, I'll often share pieces that I'm working on, and that's been a way to sort of signal to those students in my class who are LGBTQ that you have an ally here, but also those students who are not, it's been a way to also, in whatever small way, humanize these people, our people, whose experience, my family. So that's been good. There's been good conversations that have kind of come out of that. But I wouldn't say that there's really been anything that's sort of codified, in terms of talking about these things. And if anything, it felt treacherous to do so suddenly. Like I said, I've just finished my 24th year teaching, and I think this is the first time I had someone get a hold of me from within our building saying, look at your classroom library, if you can't sort of justify or understand why a particular book is in your room, and get rid of it. And so, what is going on? So yeah, I know there have been other teachers who've been afraid to even like pick certain texts, to talk about, which are sort of canonical, and just because it might touch on a particular topic. So it's just a really weird feeling that I didn't expect to have 24 years into doing this. I guess one last thing I could say too is I tried to, speaking of the canon, I know in 2000, I guess it was 2006, I completed a master's program at Eau Claire, and took a course with Bob Nolan, which was completely eye-opening and challenging in all the right ways. And this is right before Simone was born, so I was sort of had my own ideas about biology and binaries, and so this was a great class that kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone. And I always think of like what a fantastic sort of prelude to being a parent, and I think one of the lessons that all parents learn is that their kids sort of are who they are, and I think there in some aspects you have to kind of let them lead that dance a little bit. And that class was sort of great. Didn't make some of the decisions that my wife and I had to wrestle with later on any easier, but it certainly gave us a foundation for conversation. And one of the things I got out of that class was for my final project, I took a text that was very common in junior English at the time, which was Lord of the Flies, and applied a queer reading of that book, and that was presented as part of the final work that I did. And that was something I took away from that I was able to apply, kind of queering of the canon in English classes, where that's appropriate. It's often appropriate when we, in like English 12, when we talk about different approaches to literature, and kids really understand the idea of like, it's asking you to put a lens on. It's not asking you to like, completely change your, outlook, but like look at the text through this particular given lens. And so that's led to some really good conversations and ways to kind of bring that into, what would otherwise be, text that would, we would maybe traditionally think, oh yeah, would, have nothing to do with, with gender or sexuality. That just recently did that with a Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing. We were talking about some of the, problems in the text, with race and religion, but also with sexual identity. So that's, again, another way that sort of my life kind of intersects with the conversation here. So.
Perfect, thank you, Andrew. Next, we will move on to Kelly Witt from the LE Phillips Memorial Public Library.
Hi. So children encounter diversity in all different types on a regular basis. services, right? And I, as the youth services manager at the LA Phillips Memorial Public Library, get the pleasure of seeing children experience all these new and different things in all aspects of their life, and it's been really wonderful for me. My very tiny personal connection, which drove me to be more focused on censorship and just this topic as a whole, is my second year as a librarian. I started a book club for 7, 8, and 9-year-olds. And there was a child who came in, and we became very close, but this child couldn't read at the start. And throughout our journey with the book club, which was 2 years, this child learned to love reading, which was really wonderful and beautiful for me to watch and be a part of, but also felt comfortable enough to have that be the first venue as they're coming out as transgender and kind of that transition that they were having in their life right then. And so, yeah, it was really this combination of two worlds that drove me to focus more on censorship, but also providing resources for families, as I'm the person at the library who, for the juvenile collection, selects for the collection, a big part of the collection, but also takes those book challenges that we see, unfortunately, somewhat frequently from the community. And more often nowadays, this last year has been substantially more people who are challenging materials. I'm going to talk a little bit about our policies and how we do things, so excuse me if I'm looking at my notes here. So the library as a whole really has this interesting position in our community, right? It's the great equalizer. So people of all types can come to the library, and our job as a library is to provide resources for everybody, but especially for those children and families that need to see themselves in their works. So it's my responsibility to put displays out and to have resources for children of all types. Libraries really play an integral role in helping children to discover who they are and what they are, and a lot of times they do that in the stories that they read. You know, they get that lens to be able to see themselves. And it's a really beautiful thing. Both the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Pew Research Center attest to the role of the library as one of the first teachers for young people in our community. They deliver content-rich, age-appropriate early literacy programs as well as a collection. So part of my job as well is to make sure that we're following our policies not only for selection of the collection, but also that our programs meet the needs of everyone in the community. That could be as small as making sure that our story times include books for all different types of families and children, or as big as you know, a book club on tough topics that the adults hold, but also for children book clubs and books that meet the needs of all the different children who are in our book clubs. So an excellent way that we build bridges is to integrate authentic, contemporary works of art. You know, children don't want to read about, you always hear they don't want to read about, you know, like older, boring things that maybe aren't relevant to their life right now, but rather exciting, a book about a princess or a book about a dragon. They don't want to be lectured in the materials that they're reading. So that's my job, is to make sure that the books that we have on display as well as the collection has those types of really age appropriate but also appropriate to our day and age for everyone in the community. So children's materials that provide inaccurate or stereotyped depictions of these experiences, they exist, unfortunately, and they live in the library, and we do our best to get rid of them. For example, there is a graphic novel that we recently had a lot of conversation around because it had, I think it was depictions of Native Americans that were really poor, and kind of that stereotype language that we, not that it was challenged from the community, but rather we as a selection development committee thought, does this have a place in today's collection? We did that a lot when those Dr. Seuss books were challenged that just last year? But there was a lot of conversation around those, if that's, you know, a look back into our history, or if that's something that children are going to grab off the shelf and think, oh, this is my experience, and this is the books that I'm reading. But so that kind of like providing that up-to-date materials are really important. Of course, we can't go through the library and look at every single book that we bought in the last, you know, however long the library's been open for 100 years. Not that we have books from 100 years ago, but we can't go through and look at every single thing. We base up our decisions on book reviews primarily, and then when we get them, we make sure that they're in the right place in the collection. So we really do rely on the community to help us if there's something that maybe we didn't catch or that's inappropriate in a children's book especially, to let us know with those suggestions. And so we have a procedure that we follow at the library. And customers can come to any service point and let someone know that they are requesting that we reconsider a work, a material, a DVD, a book. And sometimes it starts with just that conversation, and we encourage families, especially parents, to take a look at the materials that they're giving to their children beforehand, especially if they're looking for very specific content. But a lot of times we hear from parents, wait, I don't have time to pre-read everything that I give to my children. So then how do we provide them resources that fit their needs? So we do very probing questions, reader's advisory interview, and we get to the heart of exactly what the parent wants in their materials. And for example, I just had a conversation last week with a customer. It was a teenager's parent, and they wanted books that didn't have any LGBTQ characters, didn't have any violence, didn't have any love. And so I was like, okay, well, give you a book about soccer. I don't know, like a nonfiction book. So sometimes the requests are very, very specific. But likewise, on the other end, sometimes we have requests from, a lot of times it comes more from kiddos, from teenagers that are looking for that specific book that has an LGBTQ character. And great for us and great for the community, more and more of those books exist. So it's becoming better and better, although the statistics are still not wonderful. They're not up to par with what they should be. So last year, 2 years ago, the library had an equity, diversity, and inclusivity committee, and part of our work was to develop an anti-racist pledge. But that follows through with all types of resources and materials that we're providing to the community, and so we worked really hard to make sure that the books that we're selecting meet everyone, and children can see themselves in the titles that we're choosing for them. And so when we do our selection, we have a large cart of items, and we're making sure that statistically they're at least meeting the needs of the community that we have. So a lot of times we're looking at who's in the community this year, who's in the school district this year, so that we can better serve the needs of the community. But again, we really rely heavily on what our customer base. We have a customer-driven collection, so what they are looking for, the requests that we get from our customers. So after there's a verbal challenge, and if a customer isn't happy with us letting them know that we suggest you read the books beforehand, and here's a site that you can access book reviews, then we do have a formal policy procedure on how people can request that a book be reconsidered for either a different part of the library or be taken out of the library as a whole. And I'm working on one right now that I got last week that we essentially write up a draft of why this book is in the library, who it fits the needs of, basing that on book reviews, etc. The library's Bill of Rights, the Freedom to Read, written by the American Library Association. So there's a lot to base it on. I can say that in my knowledge of recent history at the Eau Claire Library, no book has been taken off the shelves based on a request for reconsideration. So that's a really great thing, but that's not to say that they're not all considered very carefully. It's really important that we're listening to the community. And so if someone is not happy with the written response to the request for reconsideration, it then goes to the library director and the library board. And that really doesn't happen very often. A lot of times families just want to be heard. And we're happy to do that. We're happy to listen and provide them with reviews and resources out there for exactly what they're looking for. There's so much out there right now. For example, we often cite Common Sense Media for those families who are very specific, just to give them, empower them to look at their own materials that they're choosing for their families. It's not our job as librarians to choose what our community reads, but rather provide the whole. Let's see, so I brought some of these books. These are from a list from last year's most challenged titles, and I don't know if, I'll just tell you a little bit about them. This one is about a transgender child who is in a, I think they're in a play, but they're kind of just figuring out who they are, having different beginnings of different relationships. Drama, this is a graphic novel. It's incredibly popular. It's part of a series. And in this graphic novel, she is trying to figure out who she is, and there's several relationships that she's interested, some that happen, some that don't. So that's drama. Of course, we all probably know about this one, about the penguins who adopt a baby. That's one of the most challenged books and has been since it was published. It's 2 male penguins and a baby, and this is a true story as well, so that's hard to hear. So then there's this popular book, these 2 popular books, Prince and Knight and Maiden and Princess. These are really wonderful because a lot of times they're grabbed off the shelf by any kiddo who's interested in princesses or knights or dragons. So it's the story about 2 same-sex couples, or beginning of it, and kind of like a medieval adventure. So these are a lovely thing to just stumble across, and it's a great conversation point. And then I love this one, This Day in June. It's just about Bride Parade and has some very basic information in the back, but meeting families where they are. So it's not giving them inappropriate content, but rather very basic. And then this is one of my favorites, Worm Meets Worm. Do we know this one? So in Worm Meets Worms, there's 2 worms, and they're trying to figure out who's the bride and who's the groom. So, yes, of course that book would be challenged, right? So just a little bit of statistics to throw at you. Last year there was 1,145 titles that had been banned in the country. So it's not a huge number, but it's 1,145 books too many, in my opinion at least. 70% of the challenged books are fiction, 321 are nonfiction. But interestingly enough, 33% of the banned books have LGBTQ content. So that's really high. That means either they have an LGBTQ protagonist or main secondary character. So that's really hard. Those statistics are hard. Let's see. Yeah, so families who are either seeking LGBTQ content or those who are not seeking LGBTQ content, we really encourage families to come and find a youth services staff member to help guide them in their search for titles. Likewise, we talk to a lot of teens that are without their parents and are guiding them to appropriate works when they're not at that point in their journey to talk with their families yet, especially young teens. So that is a really, really cool place to be, meeting those needs of the teens before they're ready. And so that oftentimes we are some of the first conversations that kiddos get to have when they're ready to have that. And so that really drives staff to want to provide materials for children. And there's a lot more out there now. It makes it a lot easier. So that's just a little bit about the library, what we do, our collection, our programs. But yes, I have a lot of resources that I'd be happy to share that we use on a regular basis for families. Pretty much every day we're using these resources. We get these questions every single day. So it happens a lot, and we're happy to be that person in the community that can meet those needs and families' needs. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. And then our final speaker tonight is Sue Fondrie from UWEC.
I'm trying to figure out where you get a worm for its wedding gift. If anybody has an idea, let me know. I'm Sue Fondrie. I'm the chair and professor of the Education for Equity and Justice Department at UW Eau Claire, which is the main licensing department. We contain the elementary programs and the secondary programs, everything from 1 through 8, and K through 9, and K through 12, 4 through 12. So we're responsible for producing excellent, competent, early career educators for classrooms. That is our goal, but beyond that goal is our responsibility to the students with whom our grads are going to work. So that's really what we have to keep in mind as faculty, and also what our students have to keep in mind as they progress through the program, as they go into their block field placement and their student teaching placement. It's not what kind of person are we producing from our institution, it's how are they going to serve the K-12 students that they're going to work with. And we adopted a new department name that reflects how we feel education should be done. Education for Equity and Justice. It formerly was Education Studies, where education is a thing that you study, as opposed to education is a purpose, or education has a goal. It's not news to anybody that education is political. I think we sometimes hear people say things like, you got to keep politics out of education, but it has always been, and it always will be, political. The act of educating someone is a political act. The idea that people should go to school, or mandated to go to school, or that you should educate people across all backgrounds, that's a political statement. It's a political act. So that's one of the things that we do in our department, is to help future educators understand that what they are about to enter into is engaging with politics in their own classrooms and in their schools. So one of the things that we talk about is the importance of building a learning community. You cannot help people learn, you can't help people progress in skill development or in disposition development if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel respected, if they don't feel connected. So when I heard Andrew talk about how he writes along with his students and he shares his writing and he shares details about his experiences and what's important to him, that's exactly what we tell students. How do you expect students to engage with you if it's not a two-way approach? If you're not sharing yourself and your students are sharing themselves with you. So you have to set up that learning environment, and part of the approach that we advocate is making sure that students see themselves in classrooms. Whether it's on the wall on a poster, whether it's in a book, whether it's in a word problem, whether it's some other curriculum material, whether it's the offerings in the school library or in the teacher's classroom library, they need to see that they're important and that they're respected. If I go into a classroom as a child, as a student, and there's nothing about my life, and there's nothing about my family, and there's nothing about how I'm feeling in this moment, what is it that I'm going to ask myself? I'm going to say, I guess I don't matter, or I don't even exist. And that's why we ask our students to consider, as they're building their curriculum, as they're building their classroom libraries, that they represent not just the communities that they work in, because that's important too. You want to see yourself reflected as a community. But you also have to provide images and ideas about communities that these students don't know about, beyond their community, the state, the wider state, the wider nation, and the wider global communities. And one way you do that is through curriculum choices and book choices, so that they have those experiences. In our children's literature course, we talk a lot about mirrors and windows, which the two colleagues on my left probably are pretty familiar with. Books are a mirror and they're a window. They're a mirror for your experiences, So you can see how people have dealt with the things that you're going through. You can experience it through somebody who's similar to you, but they're also a window. They're a glimpse into somebody else's life. They're a glimpse into somebody else's experiences, somebody else's ways of being. I've never lived in Thailand, but I've read books about people who've grown up in Thailand, and I have a glimpse into that experience. I've never been an immigrant to this country, but I've had some ideas through a window in literature as to what that might be like. So those are the things that we ask our students to consider, is how are you going to provide these mirrors and windows for your students so that they can not just think about their own lives and reflect on their own lives, but think of the ways that they interact with other people in other places, or even other people in their own communities who come from different backgrounds, who have different family structures, who have different home languages, and who have different feelings about people that they love or that they think they might love. And as a cisgender, white, middle-class female who has multiple queer family members, I do have an agenda. It's an agenda that no matter who is in those classrooms, that they feel respected and that they feel trusted and that they feel that there's a community that they can learn in. And one of the ways that you can take that down is by removing those materials from a classroom. So when a student teacher tells me, or a cooperating teacher tells me, or a practicing teacher tells me that I can't have that book in my room because, you know, I don't want to deal with that. It's going to cause trouble. It's true. It might. But representation matters. And if you remove that representation and there's an absence or a hole, somebody will notice. They won't necessarily notice, hey, this book is gone now. But they will notice that their experiences aren't represented. They'll notice that they're not the person that they can be in that classroom. They worry about their friends who can't be the people that they need to be when they're with them because they don't feel respected, they don't feel seen, they don't feel represented, they don't feel safe in that classroom. So it's more than just, yeah, there's a book about my experience and so that, therefore I'm going to start learning. But it all adds up to an overall picture of success in education, success in school, success in whatever measure you want to use, starts with a classroom and a school community where people are respected and where people are trusted. And that begins at all levels. So when you start with 4K or with kindergarten, you start with age-appropriate texts that talk about all different kinds of families, because in that room, there will be all different kinds of families. And you don't need to go into details. You don't need to talk about why they look like that. It's enough that you show people different types of families. And then as you go up through the grades, you add scaffolded experiences and you add age-appropriate material, like Kelly just mentioned, that gives people insights into other people's lives. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is we don't just teach whatever we want to do. There's standards. I mean, I'm sure Andrew knows all about those. There are Wisconsin state curriculum standards that we have to meet as educators, that we plan for, that districts are responsible for assessing, and that our students that we produce from the program have to know about and have to meet as future teachers. Those standards talk about diverse perspectives. They talk about representing students' communities. So when you take away some of these materials, when you stop doing that for your students, you're actually not meeting the standards anymore that the state of Wisconsin has set up for social studies and for English language arts. And one of the communities is the LGBTQ plus community. It's a community in Wisconsin, it's a community in every single community, no matter how small or large in the state. And that's why classrooms should represent those communities. And when you prevent that from happening, you don't just lose an opportunity to discuss a community, or to share your thoughts on a community, or to say, that's my community, what's your community like? Then you lose an opportunity also to learn. Because learning, as we all know, is political. Education is political. And learning is a community that happens when people share stories and talk about their experiences and then relate it to the content that they don't know about yet. You take what you know and you tie it to what you don't know, and that's how you learn. And we need all sorts of representations to make it possible for that learning to take place in a community, in a classroom.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue. At this point, we will happily open the floor if anyone has any questions for the panel at large or anyone specifically on the panel.
I sort of have a question.
Yes.
And it's for everyone about whether you have coworkers who have been pushing, saying, oh, this is not appropriate for us to do it this way. A children's librarian, having a coworker saying, hey, wait a minute, we shouldn't be having those books. That's up to a parent to decide. Or certainly other teachers, whether you're experiencing it. And I guess if you're an Episcopal priest, I guess you have your own set.
We've got all our own sets. Yeah. That's an interesting question. I don't know how comfortable any of you feel necessarily answering that. At least a couple of you are covered by a union, one of you isn't. So it's a little bit tricky, but have any of you vaguely experienced or heard a story about a friend next door who had an experience with colleagues or with the rest of your department or the rest of your team that's sort of pushing against this? Or is there some tension or give and take that you found in curriculum decisions in general?
I can go first. One of the reasons that we changed the name of our department was to say we're not just about education studies, we're about education is meant to be for equity and justice. So when we hire new faculty into our department, we're very clear about our equity, diversity, and inclusion orientation. And if they don't fit with that philosophy or that goal, then they probably wouldn't apply for that job. And when we went up for the name change, which has to go through all the levels of the university, one of the questions came up at Faculty Senate. What about people who might object to that name? And I thought, that's great. Please let them object and have a discussion about it, because having a discussion about why we would change our name to Education for Equity and Justice is a door that should be opened, and it's a topic that should be addressed. I'm happy to say that everybody in my department, all of the tenure track faculty, and also all of the people who work with us as adjunct instructors are all aligned with the goals of our department. So that's easy for me to answer.
I'm curious about the public library.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And like the community, the library staff has people who believe all types of different things. But you don't go into this career in a library without understanding the basic beliefs of library services, which is part of that is the freedom of information by the American Library Association, as well as the freedom to read. It is a lot more intense when you're dealing with children and families, because I think a lot more parents are objecting to the level of content that their children are reading. And a lot of times kiddos just pick whatever book off the shelf, and they don't necessarily care or think about the person in their book, but rather they're just looking for a book about spaceships. And yes, it happens to have an LGBTQ character in it. But generally, there's lots of different people on staff. Like I said, there's people in the LGBTQ community, as well as people who maybe don't necessarily understand the community or care to understand. But foundations of library services that we provide to the community, and being that mirror and giving that window is important to everyone who works in the library, despite their beliefs. So I luckily haven't come across people who would be adverse to having a certain item in the collection, but rather people who are willing to point out, hey, we don't have enough of these type of books, or we don't have enough of these type of books. So I think my experience has been lucky because of that, but I know that it's certainly not always the case in the library.
Good to hear.
I guess two thoughts occurred. One was there was kind of this furor over EDI training in the Eau Claire Area School District this past spring. So those staff who were uncomfortable with conversations about equity, diversity, and inclusivity, this is largely voiced anonymously. So, behind the scenes, and which I'm not sure like how to interpret that in terms of like, on the one hand, like that, a staff member doesn't feel comfortable being able to have like that view expressed, so we can all talk about it. But on the other hand, I'm like, but also just kind of reminds me that, tolerance has become this value within our building, and it's a very small, sometimes vocal minority who's kind of pushing back against, some of the ideas. As far as teaching a certain text, I know I had a conversation with a colleague, and there were options within the units are kind of set up thematically, and there are different books that you can use to approach that, and one was very uncomfortable with the particular text, just not because they had any sort of aversion to the material. I think they were just worried about a class of 30 students and the climate that we're living in, and like this could be, and, I heard what you said too about like that's okay, you got to get in there, but and there is also a part of me that thinks, well, you can reach your objectives with a different text, fine. If you're not feeling you're going to be able to kind of manage a classroom of 30 students around this topic, and maybe you want to look at a text that maybe isn't going to be so incendiary. But it was never from a place of like, I just disagree with this content, I disagree with this message, and I don't think we should be teaching students that. It was more like, I appreciate this book, I'm just not sure I'm ready to walk into, what can be like this minefield. So if there's an alternative text I can use to talk about some of these issues and not just this book. So yeah, so I wouldn't say it was there's any sort of like splitting into factions within our department at all about this. We're all pretty unified around it. It might just be more conversations more about which texts should we be using, or are we comfortable using.
Okay, and I don't think the Episcopal Church falls into this conversation incredibly well. But I will say that the Episcopal Church is a 250-year-old offshoot of the Church of England. And so although the Episcopal Church has been on the forefront of all sorts of justice issues, social issues, where they meet up against faith issues, civil rights movement here in the U.S., women's ordination all over the world, all sorts of indigenous populations in countries all over the world. We are also the crown princes of imperialism because we grew out of the Church of England. And so there's a tension in the Episcopal Church where a part of the tradition is very much that progressive helping guide the curriculum that we're offering, which obviously is vastly different than what you all are offering, but making sure that that curriculum is broad, while at the same time having a fair amount of our membership, both ordained and lay membership, that are a little bit more of that imperialistic tradition, that prefers a much more traditional and conservative approach to all manners of church life. So the tension that exists in what you guys are sharing is the same tension that exists in the Episcopal Church. I think for much of the church it doesn't, but the Episcopal Church tends to be relatively broad on that stuff. Any other questions for anyone? Yes, go ahead.
I keep hearing this over and over. Is Wisconsin as far behind in these letter community activities as I've been hearing? Because apparently, like, Europe is more progressive, or these other states are more progressive, it's just kind of loose.
That's a good question. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Is Wisconsin sort of lagging behind the movement to open up these discussions about curriculum and representation and diversity? Historically, Wisconsin, for a long time, was considered to be fairly progressive on a lot of these issues, whether it be about education or whether it be about general social justice things. Have the tides turned on that? Does it feel like we're lagging behind others to a sufficient extent?
For book challenges, the statistics show that Wisconsin has fewer than many states. We're kind of like in the middle for those formal challenges. A lot of times it's states more in the south that are getting a lot more challenges from their community members. Of course, there's bigger cities and smaller cities, and a lot of those book challenges are happening in smaller communities, not communities like Eau Claire, which is kind of mid-size. So, yes, I would say for libraries, we're kind of in the middle. We're not super progressive, but we're medium.
And what we usually tell students as they're about to take a job and enter the profession is you need to know your community. I mean, what flies in Madison may not fly in your community. So you need to understand the mores of your community and know them when you're selecting what you can and can't do in your classroom. I mean, it would be great if they pushed the envelope all the time, but it would be great if they kept their jobs too.
I guess I couldn't speak to, I haven't looked at, nationally. I can just speak to my own anecdotal experience in Eau Claire, and like I said, prior to this spring, I felt like it's always been a place where we can have these conversations. And again, I teach juniors and seniors, so it's different, different conversations you can have than with elementary age students about these topics. But yeah, I don't think I've ever felt in a position where like just having a conversation about tied to something that we're reading, that this is somehow going to come back and blow up in all our faces. But like I said, this past spring, was that, as I mentioned in my introduction, just that like what is going on here, like, and it feels like after 24 years we should continue to kind of be moving in a certain direction. It seems like, I don't know if we're backwards yet, but it certainly feels like we're applying the brakes, which is a little disheartening. But
I think it's coming from, well, obviously older people, because in my experience, I've taught a children's literature course for almost 15 years now, and any one of these books, I could have shared it in class, and I would say, what do you think about it? And the students would have said, oh, I really like it, really, it's a great book. And then my next question would be, would you use it in your classroom? Oh no, I can't use that in a classroom. That would be too problematic. But now the general consensus is, yeah, sure, I would totally use that. It's a great book. And so I think the students who are currently in the program are much more progressive than the context that they're about to enter.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I don't have a question. I have a statement, young man. I'm Richie Luttrell. Richie for Chi-Town. If you know what Chi-Town is, I'm Chicago, Illinois. But I live in Superior, Wisconsin. I am the advocate for our veterans and people with disabilities. I came down here tomorrow. My daughter has a dentist appointment over there at the Marshallfield Clinic. Happened by, and the young lady told me what you're all about. I'll tell you one thing. Being a single parent of a special needs child, people with disabilities are not recognized. They are discriminated. I've been discriminated from day one, from churches to the community to the businesses. My church, I used to go, I'm a Roman Catholic, I used to go to church, not no more. You know why? The priest, not once, not twice, but 3 times said, welcome to our thing, to our worship. I told him, 1, she's a person with disability. 2, we're not a freak show. 3, see ya, don't want to be ya. I just got discriminated from the restaurant over there in the hotel. Everybody was not busy. We're sitting there, waiting to be ready or not. Finally, a waitress come a half hour later to wait on us. The community has told me that thing doesn't all belong in our community. That thing is wasting my taxpayer money. That thing belongs to the family. You know what type I would tell you? Bingo! Tell her to fly it and say, one of these days, you are going to be walking her shoes. And also, I sit on the top state advocacy board called PAMI, under the governor's board, and many, many boards. The people with disability rights, people first community. Trust me, I am the advocate with the attitude. I even got this top state advocacy award back in 2006 for what? Our veterans and people with disability. I'll tell you one thing. You say people's black manners lives, that's nothing. Be a person with disability and see how you get treated. Put yourself in my shoes. People come to you and say, that thing belongs 6 feet under. What are you supposed to say? Bingo! I'm sorry, you tell me I have a bad attitude? Oh well, bring it on. I got attitude, bring it on.
That's a good example. Thanks for bringing that up, because that's a great illustration of why censorship hurts people. When you censor images of people with different abilities, when you censor images of veterans' families, for example, in picture books, when you censor any image that should be presented to children in an age-appropriate way, it forms a community where people feel that those people don't belong. So
I my old cousin, he served Vietnam. He comes back with post-traumatic stress syndrome, and he has now Tourette's because he was around that Agent Orange. He can't control his facial muscle, and he's embarrassed to go in front of people. People say, what's going on with your face? What's going on your face? He hates going out in public because he gets discriminated. Our own veterans who fought for my freedom to speak my attitude and either to give me the freedom to have my attitude and equal, can't even go walk out the store because he's afraid that people are going to make fun of him. Is that right? This is our veterans who, suffer a war and had to be around these chemicals and come back with who knows what and what effects. And then also, what does that do to their mental status? More so? And with this pandemic on top of it, give me a break. I'm surprised he's not 6 feet under. Tell you the truth.
I appreciate your point, and I think in a lot of ways, like you say, it speaks to a lot of what you were saying about a specific subset of the community feeling represented. But I think you're also touching on something that you also touched on, Sue, which is the importance of that white, straight, cis savior group having representation of other people in what they're seeing, even from an early age, in photos and books and stories, and the way that the curriculum is structured entirely, so that there isn't such a sense of other if the person doesn't fit that sort of standard Little House on the Prairie kind of image. So I think your point is well made and well taken.
No offense to you, young man. I see your picture of, I see you wearing the colors. No offense to you, young man.
Believe me, there's nothing you can call me that I haven't been called before, and I usually answer to it anyway, so you're fine. You're absolutely fine.
Well, no, I'm just saying no offense to you, because I still have belief in the higher power, but I just still believe in the actual place, because how I was turned away and was made a mock of my daughter. Being a single parent, especially his daughter, is not easy. Because I deal with people with small minds and small attitudes, and I got a bad attitude.
I think that's why we're all doing what we're doing, is because we want to make a change in the community where that doesn't happen to people.
That's going to be very hard. I mean, I just left Superior today. Before I left, a couple came to me saying, how can I solve a problem? A neighbor is complaining about me. They have power chairs. They go up to their door, park side by side, and they go in their house, and they have a worker come out, take the power chair, take it into the garage because they can't walk that far. The neighbor is complaining that they're on their property, on the lawn. So I told them to get an estimate where your property line is. Second, start documenting the harassment. 2, start lining up. Do one in front, then one follows behind to keep somewhat the peace. That same thing happened to me. My neighbor did not like people with disabilities in their neighborhood. She basically chased another person out with Down syndrome. I had to move my mom's house because my mom passed away because my brother had only one leg. He can't take care of himself and the house. I had to move in there with him, with my daughter. She gave me nothing but help. Took down my sign. I had a handicapped special parking sign. Took it down, said we don't need it. I got it back up in 2 days because what? I knew the hoops. 2, she has stood up from my mom's house and say that people like me don't belong. The whole neighborhood heard it. But do they want to say anything to the police when I come over and complain? No, because they are all afraid of her for some reason.
Afraid of
the neighbor that's harassing me. She even told the police one time I went on her lawn naked. I don't go for my mirror naked when I go in. I scream. I go to side mirror. I know when my body's scary. I don't get old. Everything goes south. You know, come on, get real. I mean, make up stories like that. You know, and try to, you know, get me out of the house. So I said, F the house, sell it. I sell it for less than what it's worth, but I couldn't care less. Less stress on me, because less stress on my daughter, because my daughter had to go, what, 4 times to the hospital, because she has seizure disorder, mental disabilities, and also her vitamin affects her a lot. She knows who are good people and bad people. She could tell me right away, by her body language, who are good people and bad people. When she's around bad people, she shuts down. When she's around good people, she perks up and reaches out and sings. She knows who are good people and bad people. She knows mom's bad because she always tells me to get out. But I'm all bad.
I saw you putting your name on our list over there. I'm from the ACLU of Wisconsin, and so disability rights is one of kind of our major concerns. And I just wanted to say, I think the intersection, thank you, between what you're saying and what our panelists are talking about tonight is mental health.
That's what I'm part of, too.
That's what we have in common, which is the epidemic of the mental health crisis having to do with populations that are disregarded, marginalized, and oppressed. And so, you know,
if you look at the second card, that's what PAMI stands for: protection and advocacy for people with mental illness.
Exactly.
That's the board I'm on.
That what we want.
And that's under the governor's board up top of it. That's the board you want to get a hold of.
Yes.
If anybody wants to know, ask the gentleman. He got my card.
So we have that in common, that we want those resources and protections, right, from the state, because of who we are and because of the discrimination that we experience because of who we are, right? Whether we're part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Oh, they're the worst getting discriminated, especially up where I'm at.
Right, or both, right? Because I'm sure there's a lot of crossover between those two communities. So, so thank you for bringing that up, and that's, you know, what we share.
That's what PAMI's all about. If you ever want to know about PAMI, he has my card on it. I always carry my card, so that's my list of cards. It's the top advocacy group underneath the governor's board. We're always looking for members for mental illness. I'm one of the board members. Hi. I'm the one with the worst attitude. Hi. So watch out for me. And we'll put it this way, because I'm not from your turf, I'm not from Wisconsin, I'm also discriminated because I'm half hearing impaired. I'm Polish, and I'm from Chi-Town, Illinois. I'm not from Superior, Wisconsin. I'm from Chi-Town, so I'm still an outsider. You know, I've been up here since 1983. I'm still considered an outsider. So I'm discriminated because where I came from. Isn't that cool?
Do you have time to sit and listen to the rest of the...
No, I understand because I drove too long.
Oh, okay.
My back hurts, Yoli.
That's fair.
I did want to invite folks, the event is co-sponsored by the ACLU Wisconsin,
Brilliant.
to sign up for action alerts. If you want to receive emails from our organization, there's some Know Your Rights cards, student version, and the kind of standard version for citizens. So please pick one of those up.
Right, and you had a question in the back.
Yeah, I was curious because the area of choice has come up at least tangentially, I think, in a couple ways. Specifically with the library, you were talking about pulling out some of the older books, putting in newer books. With the high school, there was a myriad of options that people could choose to fit the different criteria during the year. Are there standards that come from a different organization or something else that's applied to help make those choices? Or how are those choices made to determine what's out and what's in as you make those decisions?
That's an easy one for me. So the library has not only a selection development or a collection building policy, so we follow a set of standards that we would add or not add an item to the collection based on that policy, and that's reviewed every year by the library board. But we are continually doing weeding of our collection. We are assessing each month a different part of the collection. For example, just recently I did DVDs. So I'm assessing the DVDs that we have. I'm looking at if they fit the needs of our community still. We look at, are they scratched? Are they grubby? Is the content outdated as well? And we follow a set of standards that people across the United States use. It's called the CREW method, and they have different things that you can follow based on a certain area. So if you're looking at the nonfiction animal books, there's a set of guidelines that would say if it's older than 2 years, or if the illustrations look like this, or if the pictures look like this. And then as well, when you're looking at fiction, those certain standards apply. It's different for every collection, so I can't give an overview because every collection is different. But for fiction, we would also be looking at content. And a lot of times we make those content decisions based on what the community wants specifically. So that book that we decided to get rid of, that graphic novel, we thought, okay, well, this doesn't fit what our community wants anymore. This isn't language that we use. And it was also not circulating. So that's an easier decision. Likewise with those Dr. Seuss books that were outdated, you look at those and think, I don't even need to look at the content because those books haven't circulated in 3 years. So those would be ones that we would be withdrawing.
Yeah, in the high school where I teach, the district adopted StudySync is the name of the program. The curriculum is tied to standards, and within each unit there are usually what they call anchor texts, and there'll be an option of 1, 2, or 3 texts. So you might get Huckleberry Finn as an option. I don't know if it's a unit of thematically linked to journeys. You might get then Into the Wild by John Krakauer. So teachers can kind of pick an anchor text if they want, or they're allowed to kind of move off that. There'll be a number of smaller thematically linked pieces. And the pros and cons, our second year, I think as a department we've advocated for a bit more autonomy in terms of not being so tied to this. We've found some issues with some of the multiple choice questions that are not written by teachers, they're written by this company that are putting it out there. But that's where I mentioned earlier where I'm seeing them, at least within that program, there's a diversity of voices that they're also attending to, which is reflected within standards. But like I said, that in terms of certain conversations still seem to be taboo, which are not coming out in some of the readings that students will get. With the AP classes, that's sort of the College Board. They have their curriculum and the standard that you got to hit, but there's room within that in terms of which text to kind of bring in. So if I'm not relying on like Path of Least Resistance, which is a language and composition textbook. I'll try to, if there's a given topic, let's say environmental issues, I'll try to bring in a variety of perspectives and voices for the students to kind of parse and have conversations with, and then usually there's some kind of writing that's set up where they can then try to bring their voice into it and have to interact with some of those sources. So it's not just they're getting 3 essays and they're all telling them the same thing about this particular topic, but they're invited to kind of analyze. So there's room within that, but yeah, that's definitely a College Board set kind of curriculum.
Is there any challenge with that sounds like it's got a fair amount of teacher input that allows you to, I would imagine, be a more effective teacher.
Sure, yes.
I would also imagine it allows some random outsider more opportunity to challenge the decisions that you make potentially.
Right, and it's interesting. I was thinking about that through a lot of the conversations here tonight about challenges to books and things, and thankfully, fortunately, that has never, like I said, 24 years. I've never had to really deal with that, like with a disgruntled parent or anything like that. And I was trying to, and I've had colleagues who have. So it could just be a matter of, okay, I just didn't get this particular student in class. Or I was thinking a lot about this phrase. I remember reading Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, where there's a section there where he talked about why certain doctors are sued for making mistakes and then other doctors who make mistakes are not. And they were talking to patients like, well, I just like that person. That doctor saw me as a... So there's a lot of this phrase of bedside manner. And I think sometimes, just in terms of how a teacher handles a particular text within a class, maybe makes a difference. And I guess I feel like, personally, I try to create that space in the classroom where there's that physical comfort like that. But I'm kind of a believer in that, you're not guaranteed an intellectual comfort within the class, because I feel like that's where learning occurs, is when we are kind of confronted with ideas. But I think you can be sensitive to how those ideas are being talked about, and if you're noticing certain students reacting. So I guess I don't know if that's part of it. Just there's a bedside manner, but yeah, like I just haven't had to personally really. I can't think of an instance where that was a big issue. And if it was, I'm sure it was just remedied with, well, hey, this is fine. There's an alternative, to this that we can have, your student look at, which usually takes care of it. I can't think of a time where it was like sort of going up the chain, like this cannot be, if my child should look at it, no child should have to look at this. But yeah, you're right. I think it definitely feels like you're opening up yourself to, you've got that freedom to kind of bring in things, but there's that risk too that's attached to it in terms of what, and there have probably been a couple times where I go like, okay, I wonder if, and it wasn't because there was anything, that's the right word I'm looking for, like necessarily revolutionary in the writing, but it was just maybe because of a particular word that was maybe going to show up, or because there was a particular reference, and taken out of context, which a lot of times I think these challenges are, these things are pulled out of context, like, okay, maybe, but yeah, I can't think of a time that's really happened either, so.
Yes, go ahead.
I noticed that a lot of the discussion tonight has been on the parents' pushback against more LGBTQ content in schools and libraries and whatnot, but as a high school teacher, I bet you've probably come across something I've come across a lot, which is that a lot of the times the pushback won't come from the parents, but there will be some discrimination and sometimes even vitriol coming from the students directed at the other students. And I'm wondering how you deal with that in your classroom.
as you were saying that, I was thinking of, it wasn't so much something in the classroom that came to mind, it was within the GSA after school. This happened several years ago, but there was a student who came to me and said, I've just been hearing talk that there might be someone showing up to the meeting this afternoon and try to disrupt. So okay, I'll make sure. Sometimes, you know, it's an hour after school, you know, on a Tuesday, let's say, and I might wander down and make some copies and come back and like, I'll just make sure I'm a presence in the room. I know I'm not leaving. And yeah, sure enough, there was a student who came down. I didn't quite recognize it at first because it seemed like there was kind of a friendly conversation happening between the student and one of the GSA members, and it escalated, and the kid shouted something, so I stood up, and then the kid took off and left the building, and so that was brought everybody back together, kind of calmed down, processed this, and then I tried to take it up the chain. You know, I made administration aware of this. I should mention that this is a previous administration. This is not like a CY. It was literally a different administration that's at North right now. But and anyway, there was sort of it took a week for us to get a response, and the response was I'll just try to summarize the email. It was sort of deflating. It was something about how, you know, this is a student who maybe we should give the student a second chance, and like maybe they wanted to find out about the group, and maybe, you know, if they decide that they want to join the group, you could have this conversation. But I did explain to the student how you don't go into like French class and say, you know, French isn't a good language, or you don't go into a cooking class and say we should eat fast food. It was just these analogies. I was just like, so then I had to like face the students. We had to have this conversation about like, all right, so the message from the top seems to be, so yeah, so that was when you said that, like, I very much aware that when I have a class for 50 minutes, maybe I'm not seeing or hearing because, maybe it's because of if I've shared something with the students through writing or whatever about, my situation where that, maybe that's not going to happen in class, but I'm only with these kids for 50 minutes. And so I'm well aware especially through GSA about just things that are said from student to student. And I know my daughter had a situation this year as a freshman in high school, and as much as we wanted to kind of step in as parents, we just thought, okay, let's give her some room to kind of deal with this. And she did. She handled it the right way, and it seemed like there was an appropriate response from administration. And I actually just asked her last week how things went. It's just like, yeah, the problem kind of went away. So, so yeah, it's definitely out there, even if I'm not necessarily seeing it. Within those 50 minutes. If I had, it would be addressed immediately. So yeah, I appreciate that question, because I think you're right. Like so much of my focus this year has been sort of the external pressures, but there's definitely within a class sometimes that internal that maybe I'm not feeling, but other students are. So.
Thank you for that question, and it highlights a point that's been touched on here, I think, a few times tonight, which is the importance of making sure everyone is moving from a non-discrimination model to an anti-discrimination model, so that a community or an administration's response will be something a little bit more articulate and helpful than the equivalent of boys will be boys. Because I think we all know that mindset is far more corrosive and destructive than I think we understood for a long time. Yes?
And you're all parts of institutions that are probably not the most flexible or graceful at times because they're large and national in many ways. How do you feel like you can stay at sort of the pulling those institutions forward instead of to get ahead of the conversations that you might have? So, or how do you feel like you can pull them in a direction instead of letting the conversation at large pull them in a different direction. Sort of the conversation nationally we're having now might be pulling it one way. How do you pull it back?
That's a political question.
Yes, well, education is political.
I think that our campus in particular is very much focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's one of the core tenets of our campus. Faculty and students are expected to engage with professional development around those topics, and it's encouraged. I think it's a thread that runs through not just the liberal education courses, but a lot of different departments across campus. So the campus itself, I feel, is really supportive of students, of faculty, of equity and diversity and inclusion issues. But we're a part of a larger UW system, and that system has different governing bodies, and those governing bodies don't always reflect the local context of the various system schools that exist in Wisconsin.
The library is a little bit different because we function very much as a reflection of our community. And so being active like on the EDI committee and providing resources for families, providing resources for colleagues to give to families as well, and just being really active on the different committees that the library holds so it can give a reminder about that EDI lens that we're all hoping to put on subjects more and more frequently. So you wouldn't think that a programming committee would necessarily be, EDI would not necessarily be something that we're talking about. You know, we're talking about how to plan the next princess party. But realistically, it's something that you have to be intentional about including so that the community doesn't think it's super intentional. You just want this to be just part of life and this conversation to be just part of the library, part of the education. And so it's being intentional, but also not obvious.
I bet that's hard for you to keep up with times with that. I know in our turf, our librarian even has a hard time keeping up on the LBGN stuff and all the information and referrals and outreach for groups and support even for some of the people. I mean, the school system doesn't even know what to do right now. The way they deal with it, don't say anything. That's the way they're dealing with it. Being a part of the PAMI board, that's one of the things we're looking at, is that. Because we have a PAMI member that represents that group. And I tell them up my turf, it's basically don't tell, nobody will know. And that's not right because you're not being true who you are. I know I'm Polish, German, and Irish, and I'm hearing impaired and I got a bad attitude. Deal with it. You don't want to deal with it? Go take it somewhere else. You're a clergyman, don't even talk to me. I dealt with one bad one. I don't deal with clergymen too well. I told them where to fly, how to fly, which way to rotate. Excuse me, sorry young man, again, because you're a clergyman. And in our library, even just for me, as a person with a daughter with disabilities, looking up information is not up to date. You know, when I want to look for special resources and information, where to go, what to do, I had to find it on my own research and stuff. The library is not keeping up. I really feel for you, young lady, and the school systems, and the clergymen that don't know how to accept people with disabilities. Sorry again, young man. Do me a favor, when you get a chance, look up Heaven's Special Child's poem. Trust me, you'll like it.
I will do that. I will do that. I think in general, though, the responses that we're getting here is tapping into something that really generally, and this is a vast oversimplification, but really generally is about building community and then reflecting community. And those are the ways that you keep those global discussions from getting so global that they're ineffective on the local level, and you keep the local discussions from getting so insular that they're not aware of the fringes of that community. As many ways as you can build community as possible. Our friend here is very comfortable with veterans and Polish people. We know that, right? And so if we can find common ground with support of veterans or support of Polish people, then we cease being two-dimensional figures, right? And we can start to build a little bit more community, and then our differences become interesting instead of dangerous. this. And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think that's sort of where those intersect a little bit. Yes, Dave.
My question is kind of related to Charles's question. And it might be more directed at Andrew and Kelly than to Sue, but maybe even Sue can kind of help answer it as well. Which is that I was listening to Andrew's story about that that email you got saying, you know, double check your classroom libraries, and it was very discouraging to hear that you were sent that email, because it sounds as though there's a sense of intimidation that's happening, right? That's somewhat covert, right? But also one that clearly has an effect on morale for educators. And you know, as you know, the rep from the ACLU, I'm kind of interested in whether you feel like you know enough about your rights, whether as educators or as librarians, because it sounds as though the intimidation might actually be working because there is this sense that you don't know what you can do. Like everything is so much in flux now, and there's so many kind of variables being tossed around. I guess the question I'm asking you is, like, would you feel as though it would be helpful to know more about what you can or can't do legally, right? And have any of those discussions ever come up?
That's a great question. I haven't been party to conversations about what we can and can't do legally. I've been part of the conversations that it's like the library board is the guiding, you know, their word is the ultimate say, but the administration and the leadership team makes most of those decisions, and the library board is incredibly supportive. Now, that's not always the case. In fact, oftentimes it's not the case, where your library board is made up of your community, and they just have different beliefs as library staff. But I always think you can know more. You can learn more. Things change really frequently, and I do think just keeping that eye on what's happening and what we can do legally and what we cannot do is really helpful.
One of the courses that all education majors in our program take is Historical, Legal, and Philosophical Foundation of Education, where we talk about what are your rights as an educator, what are your students' rights, what are the different gray areas within education law. But it comes down to having a supportive, whatever you want to call it, administration. If you're out there by yourself trying to do things as an educator or as a librarian, it's a lot more difficult than when you have the backing of people who will go to bat for you, who will advocate for you, will help you do what needs to be done in your field of expertise. It's not something that one person can do. It's something that a group of people has to advocate for.
Yeah, I think that would be. I'd flash back to grad school, and the paper I looked into was about academic freedom at the public, high school level. And I was thinking that the story that I used to lead off was something that this is back in 2004, and it was about a teacher in the district who had shared about her partner, and that was this lightning rod, leader telegram. So I'm like, wow, here we are almost 20 years later. This is still like the news. But aside from that, I think that would be very helpful. For example, we had this explained in a staff meeting about, the difference between advocating for your students and activism. And I think an example of the activism would be to, this was an assignment, I remember thinking, like, God, I feel like we did something years ago in like English 12 with this, but like to give students this sheet which kind of flips the script on sort of heteronormativity, these things that we are kind of invisible to us because we grew up in a culture that's the standard, but how that could be construed as activism, like by giving, this is how it was explained to us, like by giving that, sort of sheet to your students and asking them to kind of think about, that as a way to highlight how, a non-binary person, right, may feel. So yeah, I think that would be helpful to kind of know, like, really, like, I don't know, is that
It just seems like educators are on the defensive, as I think Charles was suggesting, and then, you know, what can we do to get out ahead of it? And I think of the state senator from Michigan, I can't remember her name right now, Mallory, I don't remember her last name, but the outstanding speech that she gave on the floor, defending herself against charges of being a pedophile and a groomer, right? And that kind of straight talk about what it is that she believes in, I think, hopefully would be a model for getting out ahead of this.
Transparency is really important. Democracy does die in darkness. If one person feels attacked and they are not sharing what's going on with an administration or with their colleagues, then nobody knows what's going on. And if you're transparent about it, if you're saying, this is happening to me, you know, I appreciate your support to deal with this, that's an important step in the process to them. But not talking about it in the hopes that it'll go away, I don't think has ever worked for any situation.
And I feel like, as you referenced, getting that sort of the memo about, you know, personal libraries. I think that the person that delivered that message, it was coming from a place of, you know, fear, concern, confusion themselves. So I think, you know, like you mentioned, like having some knowledge to cut through that, like in terms of what is allowed, what isn't. That would be very helpful.
Yes.
I have been wanting to voice this forever. So, with all of your groups, do you find that political correctness now has actually made us kind of backslide? I mean, we're back to the book banning, we're back to really tiptoeing around everyone, and we're self-regulating with mass shootings. Like, do you guys feel that this is kind of, the political correctness is kind of getting out of hand?
What do you say what you mean by political correctness?
Like, watching the phrases you say, you can't use certain terms, like, you know, this group doesn't like that group, you know, just basic, the censorship is kind of getting extreme.
I would say that political correctness is a phrase that's used to make sure that people aren't treated equally and respectfully.
I guess, yes, but from like a layman's term, it's more like, we have to really watch everything we're saying in front of everyone at all times. And now we're getting like this pushback with the books and the communities and the groups of people. Like, do you feel that affects you guys at all?
I think that because educators care about their students and they care about their students' families, that they are careful about how they speak about them because they appreciate the differences and that they're concerned about them. And I don't have any problem learning new terminology, using different pronouns. If I respect that person, which I do, I hope, then it's a pleasure to meet their needs in any way that I can.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I think it's important to show respect in order to get respect and teach respect as well. And so when we're asked by someone to use a certain terminology or pronoun, I think that's a good thing, that especially kiddos that I work with that can voice what they want and what they like and what gives them respect is really important. But I also don't think it's necessarily connected to the book banning. I think people are just, I think the internet and social media has given people a lot of freedom to be invisible and to not be respectful when they're voicing their opinions because they're behind a screen. And I think that's really hurt censorship and in particular book banning.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like, you know, it does come down to just a, you know, matter of respect, and certainly, you know, we had to go through that in our house, learning pronouns, and you know, we certainly talked about, you know, extending grace, you know, to people too. But I think as long as there's that effort, right, and to be thoughtful about But at the same time, I hear what you're saying too. Like maybe there was an essay that we looked at in class about where terms like African American, Asian American, like these were terms that definitely came out of a kind of political correctness, but the author argues, and I see this argument too, that there's a kind of othering that occurs. We're doing that because we don't necessarily apply that to the standard which is white. So yeah, I mean, but even there, you're still being thoughtful about language and how it's being used, right? So I don't know if that answers your question.
It's kind of a broad.
Yeah.
You need to get a handle on it.
In the back, yes.
A lot of focus tonight has been on like negative responses in the community, and those are often like the most voiced and most heard. But how often do you get comments from people saying, hey, good job, I really like what you're doing here, keep at the good work?
We get a lot of those comments at the library, actually, a lot. People are really pleased with the work that we're doing. And you can see it reflected in the children that are using the collection. They're much more willing to grab whatever. There's, of course, those few that maybe would challenge a book, but the amount of teenagers that we talk to on a daily basis who are really free to choose whatever they want, whether it be a picture book all the way up to a very difficult adult book. I think that if people are happy with what their library is providing with them, it shows in their children and their willingness to use the library like it is supposed to be used.
I think generally speaking, you'll find throughout your life that thank you is a phrase that usually is spoken quite quietly, and how dare you is one that is usually spoken quite loudly and in unison. And so that's one of those things that tends to be a one-off kind of thing, and it makes you smile on your way back to your desk, but isn't something that you necessarily broadcast all that much, whereas the negative stuff tends to get a little bit more publicity.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, I would argue that we'd certainly like to hear more of it, but definitely I would say, like, even especially at the end of a school, which is probably when you need it most, to get that last minute email from a parent or something like that, like, oh, that nurse student on the way out. So yeah, you definitely hear that too, and that's what really matters.
I think also that you're never really going to know the impact. I mean, none of the three of us know the impact that we have on people. We don't know if we stopped somebody from committing suicide. We don't know if we stopped somebody from bullying somebody into committing suicide. We don't know if we picked the just right book that changed somebody's life, or had a conversation after class or in class that changed somebody's perspective and changed the path that they were going to take in their lives. But we can assume that that does happen. And I think probably for most of us, that's things of a kind.
Yeah, and maybe 10 years down the road, right, you hear or see.
You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
Those emails are the best when you get an email from a kiddo that you interacted with years later and they say thank you for whatever. Those are really impactful. I think they give a renewed sense of purpose every time you get something like that. Okay, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm doing this research, continuing education, advocacy for a reason, and it's for the community. And I won't be able to see it right away. It's going to be years probably, but it's worth it.
And you're right. You never know like what that thing might be. Before my mom died, so her first diagnosis of cancer, she had to be taken to Rochester immediately. They saw something at Mayo they didn't like in the X-ray, so they had to get her there. My dad wasn't able to drive, and I didn't know about this. I was, kind of found out about this after the fact. But they needed somebody to like ride up with her to Rochester. So here's this 20-something-year-old guy who just got off this 12-hour shift, couldn't drive, but he's like, I'll ride. Like, last name is Patrie? Like, yeah. Like, is your son Andrew? And they're like, yeah. He's like, man, I had him for study hall. He used to play like heavy metal. I'd be proud to like ride with his mom on the way up. And so he kept my mother company on this kind of scary ride to Rochester, and I just thought that was pretty awesome. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a high school teacher as well, and lately we've been asked to put our curricula online so that parents can see it and that we have kind of these steps of approval. And I thought maybe it was like just my school, but I have friends who teach in other states, and like, yeah, there's just this push for transparency. And I guess my question, maybe thoughts or advice on this idea. To me, putting my curricula, absolutely, let me share you what we're teaching, but also I feel that lack of flexibility and meeting my students' needs, and that modifying, adapting if I'm finding that this text isn't appropriate or the right fit for this group of students, kind of feeling limited by that. So I guess my question is, like, what are your thoughts on this push for transparency in curriculum and how it relates to censorship or just not?
So I think from our perspective as teacher educators, we want our future teachers to be transparent with their communities, with their parents, with their caregivers, because it builds a community that makes a learning environment possible. And if you set the tone, if you build those positive relationships earlier in the year, it gets back to what you said earlier, then you're less likely to have a challenge that goes all the way up to the top. Instead of doing an end run on you to the superintendent, they may be more likely to say, "So, what's the deal with this book that you're using? Can you tell me more about it?" I'm like, "Sure, I'd be happy to." So if you build those relationships early in the year, if your contacts with people at home or in the community are positive, they're less likely to make that judgment about you on the fly, know nothing about your context. So I'm all in favor of saying, here's my classroom library, please come and browse it and borrow books if you want. Here's the literature circle books that we'll be using this semester. Here's the content, here are the standards that we'll be meeting. Anytime you want to talk about them, feel free to ask. And there'll be some other things too, because I'm in the current events. I'll be including certain current events as they happen along the way, so that there's obviously not the expectation that every single thing you're going to do in your classroom is going to be out there. But we're public employees. An open records request can be issued for any curriculum material. If that's true, then why not just have it available to the best possible extent that you can?
Any other thoughts on that at all?
So were you kind of speaking to, I mean, I know that this spring is kind of being more hyper aware of things happening in other districts around the country, like I know there were schools that were supposed to post every lesson plan for 190. I mean, was that the kind of transparency you're speaking to?
Yeah, that's kind of what we're being asked to do.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like so in our district, because of COVID-19 protocols, that we had to learn Canvas, and I don't know if that's something that you're like an equivalent. So I felt like that's the first time each week I had a calendar of here's what we're doing, and that was public. I mean, parents could look at that too potentially, but it wasn't like a daily lesson plan. I think that would. I was thinking the extra amount of work to go into publishing all 180 or whatever. It seems like a bit ridiculous, but if you're doing something like that, here's the calendar, here are PDFs for some of the articles so students can access them, which was vital, right, during lockdowns, and kids might be gone for 2 weeks if they had an exposure. But I think, I agree, just that kind of transparency, feel free to, I can give you your reason why, here's why we're looking at this, here's what we're doing with it in class, here's why it was selected. Yeah, that's.
Kind of a follow-up question almost for you. How much work does it take for you, separately from doing the teaching, et cetera, to put that information out there on the web? That concern of mine is that, right?
Sure.
There's one more thing for the teachers that they have to do.
Yeah, and certainly, the conversation is when do we do that time? Is that during our professional development days? Are we taking away from things like that? And and thank you for speaking. I mean, really, I guess my question is, obviously, I want to tell my kids all the time. But I mean, I teach a sci-fi fantasy class, and sometimes the kids will bring a weird Asimov story, and they're like, "Let's talk about this." And obviously, as an educator, I'm like, "Yes, let's ground that in the conversation we had last week about this piece. Thank you so much for bringing it in."
And again, I'm not afraid of a parent coming to challenge me, but there's always that question of, well, was that not on my curriculum that I posted online? And now we're to that, but maybe I'm just dealing in hopefully too far hypotheticals, that won't happen, so I'll tell myself.
Might put in the wrong administrator's hands, that list is gonna turn into, you can't, you know, there's some of the things you only can talk about.
And how much detail do you have to put into your lesson plans that you're posting is what I'm curious about, because I mean, both on the level of how I would want to design it, both for how I work and how I'd want people second guessing me, it would be like, today we're talking about books.
We'll see what they bring up. Let's bring it up. I think we're looking at a pendulum swing. I mean, education has always been full of pendulum swings, and we're in the middle of one, or probably at the start of the swing, I think. But it's something that education and educators have weathered in the past, and will weather this one too. Because I think the pendulum swing gets shorter and shorter as time goes on.
All right, any other questions?
I was going to say too, like what you were saying, I felt like, you know, all spring the thought that kept gnawing at me too is like these aren't really the issues, right? Like a book that you don't want your child to read, or the fact that there are LGBTQ students, right? It felt like, you know, if there are really issues with education when I talk about, like, I mean, you know, talk about test scores, you talk about graduation,
funding,
all these things, right? Like, right, but exactly, these are things if you really want to bring concerns from the community, but it felt like we just got kind of caught up in these sort of circus issues, right? That I think is what maybe gets people fired up and gets them to go and vote maybe over it. As a friend put it, like, he's like, yeah, I was watching the school board meeting. I never thought I'd be watching this for entertainment. And someone had asked him, like, so what's going on? He's like, well, they had some, like, you know, a bunch of parents get up and read some, like, explicit material. And now it's kind of the educated, reasonable people, and it's really boring. Everything like me is that, you know, why we're not talking about the hard reasons, because it's, you know, it doesn't have that sensational aspect as some of these other things. So that was a really frustrating part, is like not really having conversations about education. We're just talking about sort of like these easy targets, right, to pick on.
And maybe that's a good way to sort of draw this a little bit to a close, is you've each, in your own various ways, in relation to your own various positions, talked about some of the nuts and bolts of this, and talked about some of the sort of long-term, widescreen sort of vision of how you hope to approach the job, and then some of the practicality of how you do approach the job. Maybe that's sort of where the rubber meets the road in all of this, is maybe each of you just talking for a moment or two about where the current climate, the current political and discursive culture is butting up against the ideal structure of what it is that you're trying to do. You've each said things along the lines. Kelly, you said in your introduction that it's not the library's job to tell the community what to read, it's to offer the broadest possible material base that you can. So for you then, where is it in our current time and place? Where is it that the culture is sort of pushing you to try to realign that vision and that goal? And for Sue and for Andrew as well, you're trying to represent the community as fully as possible for everybody in it. Where is it that outside influence is starting to really make that difficult? Because I think even David's question from a little bit earlier about how helpful do you think it would be to know what you legally can and can't do in your position, it's one that I'm not a panelist here tonight, and as a member of the church and a clergy person, I've got a lot of freedom in there, and I still always want to know exactly what I legally can and can't do, because I know that people are gunning for me, so to speak, because of the role that I play, not because of the person I am. So can each of you maybe give us just a minute or two of where that role that you play and your own drive in it is sort of conflicting with the external culture right now.
That makes me think about wanting to provide an equitable collection for our community, but also there's only a certain amount of materials published every month. So you have a very small window of time to get a relevant and also appropriate for your community, but also, oh, there's only 2 books published this month that have an LGBTQ character or feature a diverse population of characters. So that to me has been something that's been very challenging with like wanting to move the library forward, but also you can only purchase what's published and what's out there. And so that is something that really made me think about that. I also think that it can be challenging having a large team or having a large staff when there's lots of different opinions and ideals about what should be in the library, what type of library programs should be held in, and also what staff are comfortable with programming for the community. Like I think multiple people have mentioned, the majority of library staff are female and are white. And so it's hard to, you don't ever want to be a voice for someone else and someone else's experiences, and there's only a certain amount of funding to pay people what they deserve to come in and to be a representative for that community. And so it's that ask is getting harder and harder because I think lots of people are getting pulled to be that kind of like token person that you can look at and they will give their expertise. But is that necessarily what we're looking for? So that's something also that can be kind of challenging.
Sue, Andrew, either of you want to tackle that?
I think what you see here in the panel is representative of education. All of us have a pillar to uphold in education in the community, and it's not something that we can do on our own. We're all interconnected. We all should be interconnected. We should all be advocates for each other, and you should all be advocates for all of us in all of the ways that education takes place in your community, and all of the ways that your community supports LGBTQ plus people. That's something that we can do by attending school board meetings, by advocating for books that have been challenged, by requesting books that represent different communities, by reading them and engaging in discourse about them, and by not being afraid to say your mind when the issue comes up. I think Midwest nice doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to let something slide. It's not necessarily the best course of action. Sometimes you need to confront it and say, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Because that's not my experience. And to engage in a dialogue about the issue instead of just, I don't want to make waves and look like a jerk, so I'm not going to say anything. I think we do have to step out of our Wisconsin nice shoes sometimes and have these conversations with people.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the larger community kind of trying to steer. I mean, I think that was pretty apparent that the majority of the community seems to, with kind of with where, with teachers, with supporting LGBTQ students and other kind of marginalized populations, but there was that pretty vocal minority, which is what, I'm probably, this is maybe one of a handful of school board meetings I went to, which is, that's not, a brag or anything. I feel like I should be more. But this obviously was personal, and, at that meeting, I think there were maybe 5 people who all went right away who, were kind of espousing a particular point of view, but then the next 20-some people were, the opposite of that. So if you look at that as maybe a microcosm then of the Chippewa Valley. But I will say that if there was any kind of a pull, it felt like this sort of, we don't talk about this issue, and the big thing that night was, aside from the books, challenging books was like parental rights. And so one of the things I kind of said was I don't, it's really not my place to just broker a conversation between a child and their parent about something as personal, right, as your sexual identity. But I did say, like, my role is to, I think here is to advocate for every kid in my class, regardless of, you know, sexual identity or, you know, however, you know, they're, whoever they are. And I feel like I'm going to continue to do that regardless of whatever pull is out there politically. So that's my job. I'm there to advocate for all these kids within my classroom, including, you know, LGBTQ students who, at least that evening, were sort of at the center in terms of, like, you know, talking about this.
All right, thank you. Well, then, unless there are any sort of last-minute questions, I'd like to thank you three for coming and speaking tonight and sharing so much of your story and everything that's going on. If we could get a... Thank all of you for coming out and wanting to get engaged in something as important as censorship and education, where the two meet together. And remember that the most important thing for you all as community members, whether you're part of the community in Chippewa Falls or Eau Claire or the Chippewa Valley or Superior or wherever, even Chicago.
Now you meet the nicer half, and she's wearing her shirt. Don't bully people with disabilities, Stephen. She's wearing her attitude.
The important thing to remember is that no matter where you're fitting into your specific community, and no matter where you're drawing your line for that community, you have a certain amount in your at least little circle, you have a certain amount of inherent privilege. And using that, sharing that, loaning it out to the people who you see having the least amount of privilege in your particular community is one of the greatest things that you can do for building community and for supporting everyone in the community. And when you find that you're in that position where your privilege isn't extending far enough, that's when you reach out to groups like GSAs. You reach out to groups like the public library or the local school or the ACLU or whomever, so that you can make sure that we don't have people who are falling into these fringes where the sort of general privilege, and worse yet, those how dare yous that are so loud from so few voices don't drown out the incredible people that we've got all up and down every spectrum in our community. So thank you all for coming out. You've got a lot of work left to do, and hopefully this gave you a little bit of something to start that journey off with. So thank you.